The topic today is types of data. So you're collecting data, you're surveying people, but depending on what type of data you have, you might want to do different things with it. You might want to show it in different ways. So let's just talk about what different types of data there are. In statistics, the word variable also has a meaning. In algebra, a variable is like X is what you're looking for. In statistics, it's sort of similar. It's a number that can take on different values, but really it has another meaning, which is on top of that, which is what you measure. So if you're measuring somebody's height, then height is your variable. If you're measuring somebody's success in net worth, then money is your variable. And there's different types of data. There's two main types, which are categorical, which you're going to think of as, it comes from the word categories. So these aren't numbers. These are going to be, I'll do some examples in a bit, but if you're collecting data and it's not a number that you're getting, it's a categorical variable. There might be two categories, there might be a million, but if it's not a number that you're measuring, then it's categorical. So the other option, the other possibility is quantitative. Quantitative, coming from the word quantity, which means it will be numbers. Right, so categories is categorical, numbers is quantitative. And there's actually two kinds of quantitative that we'll talk about. There's discrete, T in between the E's, which means that the possible values are integers. And then there's continuous, which means that the possible values are real numbers. So let's see some examples of each of these three types of variables or types of data. Going back to the music example of last time, if I'm asking you, say this on your favorite genre of music, there's not a number. My favorite genre is 5. That doesn't make any sense. The categories, you could call them, you could list whatever ones you want to on the survey, but I might say hip hop, pop, Latin, rock, categories like that. So these are categories. These are variables that I'm collecting, even though they're not numbers. They're just categorical variables. On a lot of surveys, they ask you gender. That's another categorical variable. Now, many will just say male or female. Of course, at this point, we know that that's incomplete. You might also want to include non-binary. And depending on what population you're asking, you might want to include agender, gender fluid. There's different variables that you could, different categories that you could consider, but you just put the ones that are most relevant to the population you're looking at. Another categorical variable would be country of birth. Right? There's no country number 1. There's no country number 2. There are different categories here. We could have U.S., Mexico, Guatemala. Of course, there's a lot of countries that we could list out, but these are all categorical variables because there's different categories. The values that the variable takes are not numbers, they're categories. With quantitative, let's look at discrete. That means that the values that your variable can take are whole numbers. They're integers. So if you're looking at movies, you might look at Oscar nominations. Possible values, most are 0, 1, 2, 3, maybe you're nominated 10 times. Every possibility is an integer. They don't have to be always positive or 0. For instance, in basketball, we often look at the plus minus. look at the number of points that your team scores minus the number of points the other team scores when you're on the court. Hopefully that's positive if you're having a good game, but of course it's negative half the time. So that's another discrete quantitative variable. A third example of that would be, say, the number of students in your math class. Number of students in class. Okay, so these are discrete quantitative variables because they take numbers as values, but they're only whole numbers. Now, continuous, you can't count these because fractions, decimals are allowed. So, for instance, height in inches, you measure this in inches, or you could do centimeters, depending on what you prefer. This one's kind of tricky. If I did make height, 4'6", 4'7", 4'8", 4'9", 4'10", and so forth, and only counted whole numbers, that would actually be discrete. But height is actually in between. You can be 6'1.5", 6'1.75234", whatever. So height is actually continuous variable. If you're looking at race cars or any kind of car, I suppose, you could look at the top speed in miles per hour. And if you're looking at maybe different countries right now, you could look at the temperature in degrees Celsius. So notice that when I was describing the different types of variables, with categories, you need to choose which categories you're considering. Ideally, you'd have all of them, but if there's a million categories, nobody's going to fill out your survey. So use the ones that are most relevant, and then you can have another category maybe, depending on what questions you're asking. But I had to list out a few different categories for each one to get the mind working. With the continuous quantitative ones, I had to list out what units I was using: inches, miles per hour, degrees Celsius. Because if I don't specify what measurement I'm using, what units I'm using, then I might get weird things going on. I'm 185 centimeters tall. I'm nowhere near 185 inches tall. So I got to specify what unit I'm using for that variable. And then with discrete, it's always going to be whole numbers, so there's nothing really to specify there. Okay, so those are different types of data. You can have one survey that collects different types of data. It might ask you your age, your height, and your gender, and those would all be 3 different kinds of data.